All right, how's it going, everyone? We have Observer with us today. How are you?
Yes, we do. I'm doing all right. How about you?
I am fantastic. Thank you for asking. How long have you been practicing for?
I've been practicing ceremonial magic for 2 years and about 4 months now.
Okay, so about 2.5 years.
Yep.
Um, what interested you in magic? I guess specifically, what interested you in magic? I guess question A and question B is what interested you in ceremonial magic specifically?
So my experience with psychedelics and entheogens is ultimately what got me interested in magic because the way some of my experiences transpired actually led to me finding out about ceremonial magic.
Okay.
And so that kind of answers both of those questions because it's ceremonial magic because just the way one of the experiences I had ended up leading me to my practice. Uh, it was through the paradigm of ceremonial magic.
Okay. And how has magic changed your life for the better?
Um, the major thing I would say is it's made me more aware of aspects of myself that were pretty unconscious before. It's made me more conscious of them, and these particular aspects were destructive, and I mean, just not contributing to me moving forward as a healthy adult. And magic gave me different techniques to not only become mindful of those parts of myself, but also to deal with them in a more healthy manner.
Okay. And what sort of techniques specifically helped you do that?
Well, I do basic ceremonial magic rituals. So like I do the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, I do the middle pillar. I do, of course, the lesser invoking ritual of the pentagram. I do hexagram rituals, I do the rose cross, and I use some yoga in my practice. So I do asana, pranayama, uh, dharana, and also I've started doing a little bit of mantra recently.
Okay. So, are there any specific entities that you've worked with that have helped you, gods, goddesses, spirits, angels, demons, anything like that that you've worked with that has specifically helped you or you felt propelled you in your practice?
Um, I'm thinking of this one experience I had meeting an entity.
Okay, yeah, I'd
But
love to hear about that.
yeah, so last year, um, I was in a very tropical, wild, forested area, and I was picking magic mushrooms, and I ate them. And when
Okay.
I went home, I've had this thing happen where in the past where I would do mushrooms and I would feel like there's an intelligence communicating with me through the mushrooms. But
Hmm.
before I did ceremonial magic, my senses, so to speak, weren't as quite developed and distinguished. But I recognized certain themes throughout this mushroom trip that I had. The first
Okay.
thing, the first thing that happened was had to do with my dogs. I was going somewhere. I was moving from one area of the house to another, and because I put like sandals on, the dogs thought I was gonna walk them. And when I got to this room, I heard and saw them follow me, and I was gonna like kind of be abrupt and be like no, like I'm not walking you or whatever. And something in me, like out of character, like was had me stop and like had me pay attention to them and like see that they were listening to what I was going to say and they were receptive to what I was going to say. And that there's even in a minor interaction like that with animals, there's some kind of like dynamic to it that's kind of energetic in a way. And it was kind of like I was almost like gently scolded or reprimanded to like catch myself there. And so I responded to them gently and went about my business. And I was like, huh, that was weird. That was kind of out of pocket. And so eventually, at some point in my trip, like I'd recently lost a close friend, and I was just thinking about like how it just that experience caused me to really see the ugliness in the world. And it was like there was a kind of Mother Earth goddessy presence with me that was nurturing me and that was understanding of what I was going through. And uh, there were kind of like, there were some weird things in that trip I experienced. Like at one point, I did Mahamudra, which is like a yogic, like sexual transmutation kind of gesture that you do. And when I was doing it, like there were hues of purple. And at one point, I could have sworn that I seen what looked like a sylph, like get up in my face, look at me, and kind of go back and into the kind of fade away. But essentially, like I recognized a distinct, like energetic flavor that was with me, that was like Mother Earth goddessy, whatever. And I asked for a name. I was, because I felt like a presence was intersecting my auric field. So I
Right.
asked for a name and I received the name Lilith. And unfortunately, at that point in my development, like I couldn't really take it much further than that with the interaction with the entity. So I was just like, I told Lilith that if she wants, she is entirely welcome to be like a teacher and a guide for me on this practice, on this journey. And yeah, the rest of the night, it's crazy. One of the things I got out of that experience was I sort of connected that Lilith is kind of has to do with, on a psychological level, the animus, I believe you would call it. And
Or anima, maybe.
anima, okay. And the rest of the trip, basically, this is funny to admit, but I was petitioning the Goetia earlier in the year for helping me with shameless self-expression and like looking good and like feeling good doing that, and being able to like feel myself and dance and enjoy myself, because I had some past issue with that, like an ex-girlfriend of mine. The tipping point when we broke up was after like I wouldn't dance because I was embarrassed, and I knew the Goetia were good for shadow work, and I petitioned the hell out of them for different stuff. But eventually, my asking them to help me like learn how to dance and lose myself in dance peaked when I met Lilith, and I danced like hell with Lilith for like hours, until I felt like I had so much of like her energy that I was like dealing with. The thought crossed my mind, like, should I do the LBRP? Like, would it banish her? And I received like laughter, like I was being laughed at. And it was kind of like the impression I got was like, oh, that's cute. You can ask nicely. But the impression I got was that doing the LBRP would just balance me out a little bit more. So I ended up having to do the LBRP later to settle myself. And someone who didn't have that tool in their arsenal had an encounter with Lilith, I could see them being pretty ungrounded for a while. And I certainly had to integrate her energy for a while after even having that experience.
I have some familiarity with the Golden Dawn geometries. They're not something that I really employ regularly anymore. but I am familiar with them. It's interesting that you say that you spoke with Lilith. So how did she appear? How did she appear to you?
It wasn't really much of a visual form, though. I did have a mushroom experience not too long before that, where I believe she may have appeared to me. And the way she appeared to me then was like my eyes were closed, and there was like a cupboard, and out of the cupboard, there was like this snake woman. Like she had like the body of a snake, and like a snake tongue, but like the upper body of a woman. But during this experience, it was just there was a lot of purple.
Yeah, that makes sense relating to Yasad and Gamaliel.
Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay. So, are there any difficulties that you've had so far? You mentioned the loss of a friend, which I'm sorry to hear about, by the way.
Yeah.
Um, if that's something that you'd like to talk about, we can talk about that, or any other difficulties that you might have had.
Like as a practitioner or just in life?
Yeah, just as a practitioner in general.
Mm. One thing I will say with that friend thing is, um, sometimes I wonder, like, if I didn't rush ahead and work with certain things, like Binah on the Tree of Life was a big one I worked with, and
Hmm.
also some of the goetic entities. Like, sometimes I wonder, like, maybe that stuff sped up the inevitable of my friend dying young from a drug overdose. Maybe it didn't. Who knows? But it's just something to consider. Like, if you're a beginner and like thinking about jumping the gun with Goetia and working ahead on the tree with Saturn, like I did, like you should consider that life happens, and if life happens regardless of the practices you do, it's like if you do work with demons and you have a lot of Christian upbringing, trauma, baggage, like you might feel like you were at fault, which isn't necessarily always the case. And I don't struggle with feelings of guilt anymore. But that's just one thing to consider for beginners out there.
Okay, that's a big one. Yeah, biting off more than you can chew, or looking before you leak. That's a mistake that we all make. So yeah, that is a great difficulty for a lot of us. Um, how is magic generally viewed in your area?
Um, where I live, there's churches damn near everywhere. So, most people aren't very understanding or accepting about it, I would say. There are some that are, especially if you were to explain it to them in a light of skepticism, sort of, and you show that you're
Mhm.
skeptical and you're not just out here believing in unicorns and stuff. But there are definitely some practitioners in the state that I'm in, for sure.
Okay, okay,
Yeah.
yeah. We we have talked a little bit before, and I happen to know about where you are, and I have spoken with other people who are about in your area, and some of these interviews. So there are definitely some people in your area.
Uh-huh.
Um, what are some ways to recognize that you might be under spiritual attack?
Spiritual attack from your own doing or someone else?
I either or.
Okay, I would say the only thing I would probably have experiences in with is with like my own doing. Like, uh, if you're not like functional as an adult and you're working like with, I don't know, for me, I was working with Yasad and I was working with Binah together for most of the year last year, and I found that I was very likely not as attuned to, first of all, the elements as I should have been, uh, let alone like Malkuth and having basic meditation practices very well established and stuff like that. I would say something like that would manifest as you being ungrounded, uh, yapping your gums to everybody about this stuff, you know, without a filter.
Mhm.
And just, you know, if you're not able to do basic shit in the real world and you're just like doing magic for escapism essentially, because it can be done, trust me, I know,
Mhm. Sure.
then that's definitely a sign that, you know, you should probably take a step back, focus on the fundamentals, focus on the meditation and the energy work, and just establish the basics very well before moving on to other stuff, because that's definitely a mistake I've made in the past.
Sure. It's a mistake that we've all made.
Yeah.
Is there any specific literature or films that you might suggest to other practitioners?
The book that got me started in my practice was Angels and Archangels by Damien Eccles. Other
Okay.
than that, I would say Liber Abba by Aleister Crowley is an excellent book to have as a practitioner. Um, Transcendental Magic by Eliphas Levi. After I'd been doing ceremonial magic for a year and I read that book, it was like bombs going off in my head every chapter reading that.
I love Levy's poem, The Magician. It's beautiful. I think it might be Crowley's rendition of it because he originally would have written it in French, I imagine. But the concept of it, no matter what language it's written in, is absolutely beautiful. It's an alchemical concept essentially, but it's written it's just written very beautifully. Anyway, I
Dude,
digress.
I love Crowley's poem, The Pentagram. I love that poem.
I'm not sure if I've read that or not.
That one and One Star in Sight.
Interesting. I've definitely read that one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So you mentioned working with various geometrical patterns like the pentagram of the ritual, or the ritual of the pentagram rather, and the ritual of the hexagram. Is that something else that you could talk about and how that has benefited you or how you've utilized that in your life?
So I actually, so here's how my practice started. My first 6 months, I was doing just the pentagram ritual in the middle pillar,
Mhm.
and then I did just the lesser banishing ritual of the hexagram for 3 months before doing the invoking, I think. But I was doing all that stuff last year in addition to working with the greater invoking ritual of the hexagram. And for me, like looking back on last year, it all ended up coming crashing down probably because I didn't have myself well established in the fundamentals and the basics as I should have been. So
Okay.
like I stopped doing the hexagram ritual for a while, up until quite recently, like the past several months I started doing it again, but like I took some time off of like anything beyond the pentagram rituals and uh the middle pillar and like basic meditations earlier this year.
Okay. And in your mind or in your practice, what is the difference between a pentagram ritual and a hexagram ritual?
So the pentagram rituals have to do more with your like your personal space sort of, and your mind, your internal world. The hexagram ritual is a bit more macrocosmic from my understanding, so it helps to align you with the macrocosm, so to speak. So like the lesser banishing ritual, the hexagram, can help clear like astrological forces, and the invoking can help bring them back in a more balanced form, so that, you know, maybe you're not as affected by, say, Mercury retrograde, for instance, or something like that. My understanding is they're supposed to be combined so that your microcosm can be aligned with the macrocosm.
Okay, so the pentagram is related to the microcosm and the hexagram is related to the macrocosm. So you might say one is elemental and one is celestial, or
Yeah.
one is elemental. Okay. Okay, awesome. All right. Excellent. So, what are some practices that you are looking forward to learning in the future? Perhaps other traditions or other formula for rituals?
Hmm. Uh, I think scrying with the spirit vision is fucking awesome. I did
Okay.
it completely like by accident one time, which was like a week or so after I had an encounter with Lilith. And after speaking with you about this, I'm inclined to believe that what I scried into may very well have been the Thanafaxath tunnel, because it it was like there was a brilliant light that my vision went through, my awareness went through, and then it was flying down this spinning tunnel, and it was just such a bizarre experience to have.
It sounds like it. I've got some
Yeah.
experience in the tunnels myself, and some of the some of the experience is I can only explain it as with a sense of gravity. Um, that's all I can explain it without getting further into it. In one word, I would just say gravity. It's like you get sucked into them. Um, anyway, do you have any other experience with the tunnels or the with the cliff off that you'd like to discuss?
Um, not really anything specifically that stands
Okay.
out that I could think of. Yeah.
Okay, so what about scrying? When you mentioned scrying in the spirit vision, what exactly are you talking about? Is that path working? Is that what does that mean?
Um, well, I guess it could be path working, but you can also do it with like the Enochian ethers, I guess, which is technically, I guess it's different than path working, but it's kind of similar.
It's similar enough to me. Any form of active imagination, scrying, astral projection, out of body experience, any degree of that to me is path working in a sense, just at different degrees with different senses. So yeah, so what are some experiences that you've had while scrying other than
Um,
your Thanafaxis experience?
well, because I don't have the ability to like project my spirit vision like I'm leaving my body and going into some alien world. But I definitely I scry with tarot cards
Okay.
just to get some kind of insight.
Okay, so scrying with a tarot card, that's something I do as well. I'd love to hear your any techniques or yeah, just any practices that you have as far as scrying on a tarot card go, because that's something I do as well.
Yeah, you just I would just say get yourself in a receptive state. Like, you know, I end up doing it at the end of my ritual work because then I'm as receptive and like energetically attuned as possible. So like if I do some dharana and pranayama before my ritual work, and then I do banishing and or maybe even an invocation, and then I sit down and I shuffle my deck and I pull a card and I see that the card speaks to me. And then I'll prop it up somewhere and I'll gaze into it, and I'll just let myself receive the imagery of the card. And not only that, but I will also sometimes like imagine myself as either one of the characters in the card or as if I'm like in the scene of the card and observing it. And
Mhm.
I just journal down any impressions that I get from that. And it's amazing the way that something like that can really give you perspective and advice about your position in life. Yeah.
I love it, absolutely. I've mentioned before, I think of the tarot cards as a very complex Rorschach blot. It's a way to they're like 78 vessels to pour your subconscious into. I don't know how else to explain it. It allows you to see things that are behind the veil
Hmm.
in a more triggered and programmed fashion.
Hmm.
Excellent. So, is tarot something that you use for divination as well?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about your process of divining with tarot.
It's not very elaborate. I either
It doesn't
do,
have to be.
yeah,
Mm.
I either do, there's this, the reverse hexagram spread is what it's called.
Okay.
That's one spread that I'll do. For a while, I would do this thing where I would like pull 3 cards, so basics like past, present, future, right? But I don't really do that a whole lot anymore. Now I usually just scry into a single card if it calls to me, or I do the reverse hexagram spread.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I never really pull more than like 3 or 4 cards, at most like 7. Some people have really complex spreads that are super accurate, but maybe I haven't been doing it that long, or maybe I'm just not that good at it. But I tend to try to just pull a few cards the way that it sounds like you do as well. You can get a
Mhm.
lot from just a few cards. So
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
you can get a lot from 1 card.
You can get a lot from 1 card. Yeah, I one of the practices that I recommend is to spend like a week or a month on a single card and try to see, its positive and negative aspects in your own life.
Mm,
At the time, that's a common tactic. Are there
yeah.
any other methods that you have that you use for divination, like runes or palmistry or anything like that?
No, but if I ever get into another different method, I would be interested in using the I Ching.
The I Ching,
Yeah,
okay, or I Ching. I'm not sure exactly
yeah,
how to. I've
whatever.
always heard I Ching, but yeah.
Yeah.
So I know just a little bit about that. There's a way that you can do it with sticks, and there's a way that you can do it with coins. I used to do it with pennies years ago. Um, but yeah, I've heard interesting things about that. It's based on like the hexagrams, right? The Chinese hexagrams, and based on whether they fall one way or another, it creates different hexagrams or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, that's my understanding of it. And they all obviously mean different things. And I noticed actually something I didn't notice before, which is that some of these, it seems that like some of these, like in dojos, you'll see like a yin yang emblem
Mhm.
usually, and some of those will actually have I Ching hexagrams around them.
Yeah, yeah, I've definitely seen that. I took martial arts a little bit when I was a kid, and there was some Korean. I think I took karate and taekwondo, so I think I was at some form of Korean martial art, and I remember seeing some like elemental or I Ching hexagrams there. I love how you mentioned how they have different meanings. I love the way that older languages, each letter has its own meaning, whether it be elementary or planetary, or whether it represents something like a mother or a father or a home or an
Mhm.
ox or something. That is so
Yeah.
magical to me. That's one thing that led me into the study of older languages like the Futhark and Hebrew and in Kabbalah in general, because the way that you can assign different correspondences and attributions to each one of the letters. Um, we actually had a guest on who was talking about the Ukrainian alphabet and how there's 33 letters, and how he wants to create different correspondences and different artwork based on that. So
Oh wow.
I love literature and our linguistics rather. I love linguistics, and I love how each letter can have so much meaning. Like each
Mhm.
letter is almost like a tarot card in and of itself. Don't you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah. Well, something that's funny to me that I realized recently is uh like I guess Aleph corresponds to ox or ox goad,
Hmm.
and
Well, Lamed is the
Lamed.
octoroad, I believe. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
Aleph
what,
is
okay.
an octoroad in many ways. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, the letter A upside down, it looks like an ox skull.
Hmm. It does.
Yeah.
It does. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love how some of the symbols resemble the things that they look like too. It's so
Yeah.
beautiful. So yeah, was there anything else that you wanted to cover, or did I leave anything else out? You had mentioned working with some of Damien Eccles and Crowley's and um who else did you recommend here? I'm trying to think.
There was a book.
Levy,
There's a
you
book by
mentioned as well.
Charles
Go
F.
ahead.
Yeah, there's a book by this Freemason named Charles F. Hannell that I read not long before getting into these practices because I was
Mhm.
curious about like artistic inspiration. And I recognize now, having experience in some of these practices and having gone into Hermetic and Kabbalistic philosophy a little bit, I could definitely recognize that like all these universal laws this guy talks about in his book are essentially Hermetic and Kabbalistic philosophy rehashed.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
the book is called The Master Key System.
I've heard of it. Okay. You also mentioned something that was interesting to me that was how the mushrooms have a spirit, or how you communicated with the entity of the mushrooms, and sylphs and nature spirits. That's something that I love. I took a rather large dose of mushrooms myself one time, and I feel like I had a communication with, if it wasn't the spirit of the mushroom, it was some spirit of nature. And it completely transformed my life, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like I was reborn in many ways, with like a spark of, I don't know, nature in me in a way that there never was.
Mm-hmm.
I basically, like, it was like it was like I could see out of a different eye all of a sudden, and it was like I could see behind the framework of everything, and underneath everything there was just this electric opalescence that was just underneath. Like, it was like everything that I saw under the physical plane was like skin,
Yeah.
and then I could see underneath that, and there was just this electric opalescence, this scintillating serpentine slithering electric opalescence underneath everything that I just can't explain other than an experience with the spirit of nature.
Yeah,
um
it
Go ahead.
sounds like what they call like the hallmark experience of Yasad, the vision of the machinery of the universe.
That's a very, whenever I was working through like different orders and systems, and I was working through the Golden Dawn material, and I was reading about, I think Crowley was the one who was talking about like the like Mount Abiagnus and like the ascent up the tree, and like he was like attributing different talents and abilities to different parts of the tree. And when I read A Vision of the Machinery of the Universe, that was very reminiscent of
Mm-hmm.
what I experienced. It was,
Yeah. And
I love that you said that. That
was
definitely
it
resonates with me.
psilocybin mushrooms?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I've got some right over there still. It's the same.
Yeah.
I've got the same exact strain. Exact. It was
Mm-hmm.
gold. I know why they call them golden teachers now.
Oh yeah, they're not joking around. Yeah, I feel like taking psilocybin mushrooms like opens your astral senses and allows you to see that level of reality and perceive the more subtle layers of reality a lot more easily.
I think it can. I think if you're ready and you're balanced enough, then it's like electricity in many ways. If you're grounded, like, it won't hurt you. But if you're not grounded enough, then that lightning bolt will hit you and it'll fry you.
Mm,
Like, you have to approach it with respect. It's like you said, it's a spirit as well. The mushrooms are just the skin of the spirit, and you're shaking hands with it. You're invoking that spirit. You're
mm,
doing an invocation of a nature spirit, perhaps the gnomes, when you ingest psilocybin. So yeah, you approaching it with respect and admiration almost is definitely an approach that I try to take. But yeah, I think it can open up astral senses for people who are ready for it. And
mhm,
I definitely had a sense for the astral before I did that. And I think that might have been why my experience was so intense, because
mhm.
I was already a practicing magician for almost 20 years when that happened. So I
Mm.
had been using clairvoyance and scrying and astral projection for over a decade. So whenever I think I took a half an ounce of mushrooms. I think I took 14 grams. Um, I think I ate 7 grams, and then like an hour later, I ate like 7 more grams,
Oh my
and then
God.
I just like cultivated. Yeah, I I felt like, okay, so here's the story behind that. I felt challenged by synchronicity. So I was watching my favorite film, Highlander, and I was like, I'm gonna eat mushrooms and I'm gonna watch Highlander. And by the time I finished eating the mushrooms, I was halfway through the jar that, I was given as a gift by one of my friends. And there was a scene where like the archetype of death like showed up on the screen and like laughed and rode away on a horse. And so I was like, okay, fine. Like, I'll take more. Cause like I was sitting there thinking about it, like an hour later, like, should I take more? Like, or am I just scared, like, of taking more? And then like
Uh-huh.
Death rode up on the horse and like laughed and like rode away. So I was like, okay, I'll go take more. So I ended up eating a half an ounce of mushrooms and had this vision of, like you said, it was very similar to the machinery of the universe. And I saw you might say the machine elves, I think as McKenna talks about them, like I saw the jesters, I saw the machine elves, I saw gnomes, I don't know what you want to call them, but it was like they were reconfiguring my DNA or my consciousness behind the scenes,
Mhm.
like behind the framework. And so yeah, that was quite the experience. And that definitely affected my view of magic and the way that I practice magic. When I had such an experience with nature, it seemed like I needed less structure in my ceremony, and in my practice. It's hard to explain.
Mhm. Um, and with doing mushrooms, it seems to me that there is an aspect of it that's very cliphotic. Would you agree with that?
I think it can be. I think it's you're right. I think it's naturally brings out the shadow and a lot of people, even if just at some point, there generally tends to be some form of shadow reflection there. Unless the person is like extremely integrated and already have gone through that, and they might not notice that that's what's happening just because it's something that they're used to. But I think salvia and mushrooms are both that way.
Mhm.
Salvia can definitely bring about the shadow world and to some people.
Mhm. Yeah, I know that I haven't done 14 grams of mushrooms before, but the most I've ever done is 10. And after that experience, I felt like either I had a tolerance or just the way I am anymore would be overkill. But it felt like I died. I was dying for a while. And then I
Yeah,
was reborn so perfectly crispy anew, you know?
that's what I was saying is I felt like I was reborn with a new spark of life within me, and I just remember right after that just being bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and
Yeah.
that feeling has never left me. I don't know. I don't recommend that everybody just do that. I had
Mhm.
been taking mushrooms for, definitely over a decade before I did that.
Mhm.
But I wasn't my first time taking mushrooms. I just ate a half an ounce of mushrooms, so
Yeah.
don't do that. And
Now,
definitely
seven.
set and setting, guys. Definitely set and setting. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, definitely set and setting. Yeah, I was just gonna say that like 7 grams for me, maybe even 8 grams has been like my upper heroic dose sweet spot. Um, and those experiences are very visionary. I even remember in one instance when I did it, my like inner vision with my eyes closed went into the same exact like room that I'd been to before on DMT.
Okay.
And it just so happens that this is like the same, it seems to me to be the same room that I found my awareness floating through before I got to this white light at the end of it and going into the Fantifax tunnel. But that time it wasn't like a complete mind fuck from like do being on DMT and mushrooms because like the only thing I did was like 20 milligrams of THC like 4 to 6 hours prior. And what really had that experience happen was just all the energy work I was doing, which right before sitting down and having that experience, and very likely my encounter with Lilith like a week prior.
Okay, so tell me, have you ever practiced magic while on entheogens or psychotropic drugs?
Yes, yes, I have.
And what was that experience like for you?
So you can't, I mean, you can try, but I would say it's unadvisable to do like an incredibly high dose of mushrooms and then try to do like a pentagram ritual. But what happened for me when I tried that, this was when I did 10 grams of mushrooms. I went outside into the woods, into this place where I was going to do the LBRP. And uh, anytime I've done ritual work on like 7 grams or more of mushrooms, or at least tried doing ritual work on 7 grams of
It
more,
gets a little silly.
it's very disorienting.
Hmm.
But something interesting happened though. The first time I drew a pentagram with my eyes closed on 10 grams of mushrooms, it was like a living seal formed with each line of the pentagram I drew, like
Hmm.
separately but together, and it was like
Okay.
alive. I don't know how else to explain it.
No, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. I've practiced a little bit, and a little bit. I've practiced more than a little bit on psychotropic chemicals, and it has a different feel. It's your brain has to spend less energy thinking about how real the experience is, and it spends more energy just realizing how
Mm.
real the experience is.
Hmm.
And it just aids you in that process. It's and you can tell this by looking at things. If you look at clouds and trees and different stones while out walking in nature, it's like, oh, that tree looks like an elephant, or oh, that cloud looks like a dragon. Like when you're on these drugs, like the tree is an elephant and like the cloud is a dragon, and your brain doesn't spend any time like trying to process this, so it allows you to spend more energy interacting with it, so you can imagine on the spiritual plane, like it's just everything is just lit up with life, and there's the bridge is already there, I guess, is what I'm
Yeah,
trying to say.
yeah, yeah. The other thing I would say about this is in moderation and medium to low doses of this stuff,
Mhm.
that's what you want to do if you're trying to actually do ritual work and meditation in conjunction with entheogenic substances or psychedelics. You're not supposed to be going ham doing a heroic dose and trying that shit. I mean, you
I
can if
agree.
you'd like, yeah, and see how that works for you, but I promise it's pretty fucking disorienting.
Yeah, I wasn't able. The only thing that I can do when I'm on a high level dose is things that I have memorized already, and things that I have practiced while astral projecting. So if it is a combination of something that I have practiced on the astral plane while astral projecting, like out of body experience, astral projecting practiced, and it's something that I've memorized, then I'll take a high level dose of psychedelics, because then it allows me to stay in that projection longer,
Mm-hmm.
um, without being distracted by trains going by or my neighbor's dogs barking outside or whatever. Those things just become part of the experience,
Yeah.
which they already are, but it's more apparent that way.
Yeah, you don't exactly want to learn the LBRP for the first time ever while you're
Yeah.
tracked on ketamine.
Good. That's an excellent example. Excellent example. All right. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Uh, the only thing else I would like to add is the experience I had that got me into these practices. It's funny because when you mentioned that your friend gifted you some mushrooms earlier, the guy who this guy posted this book on his story, this book by Damien Eccles, Angels and Archangels, not long before I had the experience that got me into ceremonial magic. And it's funny because in high school, I gave this guy mushrooms, which led to him finding out these practices eventually based on what he experienced. And then later, he posts this book, Angels and Archangels. That's all I see. I don't even see it says Magician's Guide in the bottom in smaller print. And I'm like, whoa, Angels and Archangels. That stuff sounds pretty fucking cool. And like he made a comment about it too, like on his Snapchat story, whatever. He was like take this book seriously, and you'll be surprised what the heck can happen. And so I screenshotted it, and I made a mental note of it, like, oh, I'm going to add this to my Amazon wish list, and maybe I'll get it one day. And then I had an experience when I did 7 grams of mushrooms of, I was posing in the mirror because I used to be really into bodybuilding. And I just did my first show, and I got really good feedback with regards to my posing, which I spent a lot of time on, because I saw bodybuilding posing as an art form that's completely underappreciated, and it really needs to step its game up based on what I've seen competitively. And so that being into bodybuilding and seeing how great some of these guys pose got me interested in, how do you get artistic inspiration where you can be original and innovative and seemingly pull a vision out of the mind of God and share it with other people through your being it, right? So that led me to the Master Key System by Charles F. Hannell, and some other books in the past. Like there was one called The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace D. Wattles, which I'm sure I'd recognize. Hermetic philosophy and Kabbalistic philosophy embedded in whatever universal laws this guy would talk about in his book. But I was practicing posing on 7 grams of mushrooms, and I hit this pose with my head looking up and my arms outstretched, and my eyes were closed, and I saw perfectly with my eyes closed what I knew was a tarot card just because I recognized the art. And it said the Fool, and it was the Fool tarot card. And prior to this, I never went into tarot. I was just really into working out and bodybuilding, and that was my entire persona, and I was all in on that. But that card ended up essentially predicting me starting my journey with these practices in the long run. So after I saw that, I ended up connecting the dots back to this Damien Eccles book, and that's how I got my practice started.
Very interesting. It's interesting when you mention posing, because the bodybuilding poses always reminded me a lot of the yogic asanas, or asana. Is a very similar thing. You're striking a pose, and I believe asana means throne, and it's like it's an invoking, you're like creating a god form in a lot of ways. And I always say that similar forms channel similar forces, and so yeah, it's like you're striking a certain form to call in a certain force, and that just reminds me a lot of yogic poses.
Yeah. Yeah, you're
Very
definitely bringing forth a specific kind of energy in doing certain poses that corresponds to, your presentation on stage as a bodybuilder, for sure.
Definitely. All right. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground, and I think unless there's anything else that you'd like to mention.
Not that I can think of. I might have said this before, but if someone who is a complete novice, beginner like I was a couple years ago, I mean, I'm still pretty much a beginner, but really, I really want to reiterate, when you're starting out on this path and these practices, really take your time. doing the fundamentals and mastering them before moving on, because your beginner ego will be like, magic is real, oh my god, like let me just go up the tree right now. Or let me just hit up like half the Goetia, and that's not
Yeah.
something you want to do when you're first starting out.
Yeah, you definitely want to take your time. Well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing a little bit of your life with us and some of your experience. And I wish you well, and I hope you have a good rest of the week, brother.
Hey, thanks for
Thank
having
you
me,
very
brother.
much. Take care.
You too.